Hello, reading room. How are you? I am trying to calm myself down. But, it's not anything that wasn't predictable. Wasn't like I was expecting to have that money just all of a sudden work for me and be okay and all that kind of jive. No. Did I expect that? Of course not. Why not? Because Oakland University has been compromising my data, and that's the reason I'm fired from day one. That and Elaine Carey was humiliated by me. Tried to get something in my file that was just a bunch of BS. And I think that it was, I do think that Keith Williams probably did actually let me know. And he probably was reprimanded for that. But you know what? That whole thing right there is a bunch of crapola, because how is it that somebody could put stuff in your file that you're unaware of and that makes you look like whatever? And that's the whole thing. So why for so many years have you been planning this file against me? I think I must be really, really important. I think I might be a button pusher is what I think I am. I think I just know how to push buttons. I think that's what the problem is. And I think that the powers that be are not giving it up. They're saying, we'll destroy the button pusher so that we can keep things the way that they are. And the button pusher is here. Why? Because you won't let it go. You have nothing to do with equality. Political, social, economic equality. You have nothing to do with equality. And that's the reason why you keep promoting at the university levels, teaching people what? That there's a hierarchy. No, there's not a hierarchy. But if there was, you would be on the bottom because you are so morally compromised. Those are surely the people that we'll be getting rid of. Surely. Those people you can't trust, who aren't loyal, who are morally compromised. And you know it. So you're clinging with your nails hooked in. People like Elaine Carey and people like Ora Hirsch, who looks like my cousin Michelle, only boy, did you take a horrible turn. Yikes. Were you on opioids? Yikes. Okay, I have to go get my shawl because this isn't the look I wanted today. It's just... just basically the powers that be that want to make everyone else appear helpless and fall in line. And, they've done some research in psychology, and they've been at 6th grade boys camp, screwing them, literally, to try and get everybody to fall in line like a bunch of robots. Here's some pills. Let me make sure that you don't have a spirit any longer. They are murderers. They're murderers. They murder your body, mind, and soul. The universities are murderers. And don't think we don't know how to push that button in a way that gets rid of only what we need to get rid of. And now in judgment, it's pretty clear, right? Not to me. I'm the flame. You're the moth. That's how they're ruling you out. Making you extinct. You alien mass, you. Blah. Chapter 7. Miss Rottenmeier has a day of troubles. When Heidi opened her eyes on her first day in Frankfurt, she could not in the least understand what she saw. She rubbed her eyes very hard and looked again, and saw the same thing each time. She was sitting in a high white bed, and before her she saw a large wide room, and where the light entered hung long white curtains. Near them stood 2 chairs with great flowers thereon. Against the wall was a sofa, also covered with flowers, before which stood a round table. In the corner was the wash stand with things upon it such as Heidi had never seen. Now she remembered that she was in Frankfurt, and the whole of the day before her came to her mind, and lastly, the instructions given by the lady as well as she had heard them. Heidi sprang down from her bed and got herself dressed. She now went to one window, then to the other. She must see the sky and the earth outside. It seemed as if she were in a cage behind the big curtains. As she could not draw them aside, she crept under them to get to the window, but this was so high that she could only just look out. Nor did she find what she wanted. She ran from one window to another and then back again, but the same things were always before her eyes, walls and windows and another wall and more windows. The child began to be troubled. It was still early, for Heidi was accustomed to rise early on the Alm and to run out at once before the door to see what the weather was, if the wind sang in the pines, and if the little flowers had opened their eyes. Like a bird that was the first time finds like a bird that for the first time finds itself in a beautiful glittering prison and runs here and there, trying on all sides to regain its freedom, so the child ran from one window to another, trying to open them, for she felt that she must see something besides walls and windows. There must be green grass on the earth beneath, and the last traces of melting snow on the precipices, and Heidi longed for the sight. All the windows were tightly fastened down, and no matter how the child lifted and tugged and tried to get her little finger under the sash in hopes to get hold enough to force it open, it was in vain. Everything was as firm as if made of iron. After a long time, she became convinced that her efforts were useless. She gave up trying and wondered if she could not perhaps get out of the house door and run around the corner until she found the grass, for she remembered that when they came on the preceding evening, they had passed over stones all the way. But just then, someone knocked on the door. Miss Tennant's head appeared, and she uttered the words, "Breakfast ready." Breakfast ready. Heidi had no idea that this meant she was to go to breakfast, and on the scornful face of the lady's maid, the child saw a warning not to approach too nearly rather than anything of a friendly nature, and read the face too truly to wish to try familiarities. She now took a little footstool from beneath the table, set it in the corner, and taking her seat there, waited patiently to see what would happen next. After a while, something came with a good deal of noise. It was Miss Rottenmeier, who was again in great excitement and came hurriedly into the room, saying, "What is the matter with you, Adelheid? Don't you know what breakfast means? Come at once." This Heidi understood and followed into the dining room, where Clara had long been seated. She greeted her little friend with pleasant words, and had a far more cheerful expression than usual, for she anticipated all sorts of adventures in the day that had just begun. Breakfast, however, proceeded without accident. Heidi ate her bread and butter very properly, and when Clara was rolled into the library, Miss Rottenmeier gave the child to understand that she was to remain with Clara until the professor came. As soon as the children were alone together, the little girl asked at once, "How can one look out, Clara, and see quite down to the ground?" "You open the window and peep out, of course," said the other, much amused. "But these windows won't come open," said Heidi very sadly. "Oh, yes, they will," said Clara, was Clara's reassuring answer. "You cannot open them, nor can I help you. but when you get a chance to speak to Sebastian, he will open one at once. It was a great relief to our little mountain girl to know this, for she had felt as if she were in prison. Soon Clara began to question Heidi concerning her life at home, and Heidi told with pleasure all about the elm and the goats, the pasture life, and all that she loved up there. While the girls talked, the professor arrived, but he was detained by Miss Rottenmeier in the dining room before she allowed him to go to the study. There she seated herself before him and began excitedly to explain the dilemma she was in and how it had all happened, how she had written to Paris a while ago to tell Mr. Seisman that his daughter had long wished for a companion and that she herself was convinced that were someone to join Clara in her studies, it would act as a spur to her learning. Miss Rottenmeier felt that it would also be most agreeable to herself to be released from the necessity of being always with her young mistress. Mr. Seisman had replied that he should gladly comply with his daughter's wish, only making the condition that such a playfellow should be treated in every way as if she were a daughter of the house, for he would have no tormenting of children in his home, which indeed was a most unnecessary remark, said Mrs. Rottenmeier, for who would wish to be cruel to a child? Now the professor must hear how very unlucky she had been in her choice, and there followed a detail of every instance of ignorance that Heidi had shown. Not only must a child's education begin with the alphabet, but every point of good breeding must be taught her from the very rudiments. Out of this unbearable position, she could see but one hope of escape, which was for the professor to declare that it would be very unprofitable for two children who were in such different stages of advancement to study together, especially for the more proficient. Such a statement would afford Mr. Seisman a plausible ground for withdrawing from the bargain, and he would agree that the child should be sent back to her home. This step she herself dared not take, not now that the master of the house was aware that the child had arrived. But the professor was cautious and never one-sided in his decisions. He confirmed Miss Rottenmeier with many words and with the prospect that if the little girl were so backward on one side, she might be as forward upon others, and that a well-regulated method of teaching would soon bring things to a proper balance. At last the housekeeper became aware that she could hope for no support from the professor, but that he intended to begin with teaching the alphabet. She opened the study door for him and shut it behind him quickly. For all things she dreaded to be obliged to listen to the teaching of ABC. Walking up and down the dining room with great strides, she now tried to decide this momentous question of how the servants were to address Adelheid. Mr. Seisman had certainly written that she must be treated as if she were his daughter, and this order must particularly have reference to the conduct of the servants, thought Miss Rottenmeier. Miss Rottenmeier. She was not, however, allowed to pursue her train of thought without interruption, for suddenly a startling crash as of something falling was heard in the study, followed by a call for Sebastian. She hastened in. On the floor, in the greatest confusion, lay the whole collection of school books, copybooks, inkstands, and other aids to study, and over all the tablecloth from beneath, which a black rivulet ran down the whole length of the room, Heidi had vanished. Now we have it, cried Miss Rottenmeier, wringing her hands. Carpet, books, work basket, everything in the ink. Never has the like happened before. This is the work of that wretched child, without doubt. The professor stood much disturbed and looked at the wreck, a wreck which certainly had only one side, and that a very distressing one. Clara, on the other hand, was regarding the whole thing with a pleased look, and now explained, yes, Heidi did it, but not intentionally. Indeed, she must not be punished. She was so dreadfully quick in her movements that she dragged the tablecloth with her, and so everything fell down. A number of carriages drove by, one after the other, and that made her fly off. She has probably never seen a coach. There. Is it not just as I told you, Professor? Not one proper idea has the creature, not the least suspicion of what a lesson is, nor that she should give attention and keep still. But where has the mischievous child gone? If she should have run away, what shall I tell Mr. Seisman? Miss Rottenmeier hurried downstairs. There in the open house door stood Heidi, looking up and down the street, quite puzzled. Where is the matter? Or what is the matter? What are you thinking of? How dare you run off in this way? Cried out Miss Rottenmeier to the child. I heard the wind in the pines, but I don't know where they stand, and now I do not hear it any more. And she stood staring with disappointment toward the side from which the sound had come. It was a sound of rumbling of heavy carriages, which seemed to her unwanted ears to be the rushing of the phone in the pines, and which had filled her with the greatest delight. Pine trees. Are we in forest? What kind of notions are these? Come upstairs with me and see the mischief you have done. Miss Rottenmeier went upstairs again, followed by Heidi, who looked on the heap of things that she had spilled on the floor in consternation. For in her joy at hearing the wind, she had thought of nothing but getting to the pines. You have done this once. A second time it must not happen. You have done this once. A second time this must not happen, said the housekeeper, pointing to the floor. In order to learn, one must sit still and pay attention. If you cannot do it yourself, then I must bind you fast to your chair. Can you understand what I say? Yes, answered Heidi, but indeed I will sit still. She understood now that it was a rule that during study hours she was to sit quiet. Sebastian and Annette came in to put things in order again. The professor withdrew, for there could be no more lessons that day. There had certainly been no yawning. It was Clara's habit to rest for a while in the afternoon, and Heidi was to choose her own occupation for that time, as the housekeeper had that morning explained to her. So when Clara had settled herself to rest in her bath chair, and Miss Rottenmeier had withdrawn, to her own room, the child realized that she was free to do as she liked. She was glad enough, for she had something in her mind that she longed to accomplish. For this, however, she needed assistance, so she stationed herself in the corridor before the entrance to the dining room in order that the person to whom she wished to speak could not escape her. You know who it is? In a short time, up came Sebastian with a tray, bringing the silver from the kitchen to put it away in the sideboard in the dining room. As he reached the tipmost step, there stood Heidi before him, and very distinctly she said, "You or he?" Sebastian's round eyes opened to their utmost capacity, and he said rather sharply, "What do you mean, mamselle?" "I want to ask you something, but it is nothing naughty, like this morning," she said deprecatingly, for she thought he was angry, and she supposed it was because of the ink on the carpet. "Oh, but why must I be called you or he? First tell me that," said the man still sharply. "That is what I must always say, for Miss Rottenmeier has ordered it so." At these words, Sebastian burst out laughing so loudly that Heidi stared at him in surprise, for she saw nothing to laugh at. The man, however, understood at once what it all meant, and said, "All right, now go on, mamselle." "I am not mamselle, I am Heidi," said the child, now somewhat nettled in her turn. "That is true enough, but the same lady has ordered me to say mamselle." "Has she? Well, then I must be called so," said Heidi resignedly. For she had learned that everything in the household must be a Miss Rottenmeier wish. "Now I have 3 names," she added with a sigh. "But what did the little mamselle wish to asked Sebastian at last as he went into the dining room to put away the silver. How can one open these windows, Sebastian? So, just so. And he opened one of the great windows. The child ran to look out, but she was too small. She reached only to the sill. Sebastian brought a high wooden stool to the window. Now the little mamselle can look out, he said, as he helped her up on it. But the child withdrew her head quickly with a look of keen disappointment on her face. There's only the stone street and nothing else, she said sadly. But if you go all around the house, what can you see on the other side, Sebastian? Just the same. Is there no place where you can see the whole valley far down and away? To do that, you must climb up a high tower, a church tower, like that one over there with the golden ball on top. You can look down from that and see about on every side. In a twinkling, Heidi had climbed down from her high stool, was off to the door, out into the street, and away. Things did not happen as she expected, however. When she saw the tower out of the window, she thought that she could go to it by simply crossing the street. It seemed directly before her. She went the whole length of the street, but did not come to it, nor could she see it anywhere. She turned a corner, going farther and farther, still no tower to be seen. A great many people passed her by, but they all seemed in such haste that the child thought they would not find time to give her any information. But on the next corner, she saw a boy standing who carried a small hand organ on his back, and on his arm a queer-looking animal. Running up to him, the child asked, "Where is the tower with the golden ball at the top?" "Don't know." "Whom can I ask to tell me?" "Don't know." "Do you know of any church with a high tower?" "Yes, I do." "Then come and show me. Tell me first what you will give me." The boy held out his hand. Heidi searched in her pockets and drew out a little picture of a pretty wreath of red roses. She looked at it rather regretfully, for Clara had given it to her that very morning, but to look down into the valley, to survey the green precipices. "Here," she said, and held the card toward the lad. "Will you take this?" He withdrew his hand and shook his head. "What do you want, then?" asked she, tucking her picture away gladly. "Money. I have none, but Clara has. She will certainly give you some. How much do you want?" 3 pence. "Well, then, come along." They wandered down a long street, and the child asked her guide what he carried on his back. He explained that there was a beautiful organ under the cloth that made charming music if he turned the handle. All at once he stood still before an old church with a high tower. "This is it," he said. "But how can I get in?" asked Heidi, as she discovered that the door was fastened. "Don't know." "Do you think I could ring as they do for Sebastian?" "Don't know." The child has discovered a bell, at which she pulled with all her might. "When I go in, you must wait for me here, for I do not know my way back, and I want you to show me." "What will you give me for it?" "What do you want?" "Another 3 pence." The creaking lock was turned from within. The creaking door was open, and an old man stepped out. He stared somewhat curiously, at first at the children, then in surprise and anger demanded, "What do you mean by ringing me down, you two? Can't you read what is written here over the bell? For those who wish to climb the tower." The lad pointed to Heidi with his forefinger and said nothing. Heidi said at once, "That is just what I want to do. What business have you up there? Did anyone send you?" "No, I want to go up so I can look down." "Make haste and get you home, and do not try this joke again, for you will not get off so easily the second time." The tower keeper turned away and was going to shut the door, but Heidi held him by the coat and begged, "Only just once." He looked round, and Heidi's eyes gazed up at him so beseechingly that he was moved and took the child by the hand, saying kindly, "If you're so very much set upon it, come with me." The boy had seated himself on a stone seat beside the door to show the child that he did not wish to accompany them. They climbed many, many steps, Heidi holding the tower keeper's hand. Soon the stairway became much narrower, and at last was only the smallest passage, and they were at the top. The tower keeper raised her arms in his arms and held her at the open window. There now, look down, said he. Heidi looked down over a sea of roofs, towers, and chimneys. She drew back quickly, saying, quite downcast, "It isn't anything like what I thought it would be. Now you see how it is. How could such a little girl understand about a view? Come now, and ring no more tower bells." He set the child again on the floor and led the way back down the narrow stair. Where the passage grew wider, they came to the keeper's room. Near the door, the floor extended under the steep roof, and there stood a big basket. A large gray cat sat there growling, for her family lived in the basket, and she warned everybody who passed not to meddle with her household affairs. Heidi, who had never seen so huge a cat, stopped to admire. "Armies of mice lived in the old tower," said Mrs. Puss. "Fetched every day without trouble a good half dozen for dinner." Seeing Heidi's interest, the keeper said, "She will not hurt you while I am here. You may look at her kittens." Heidi drew near the basket and broke out into exclamations of delight. "Oh, the pretty little creatures, the beautiful kittens," she cried again and again, and ran round and round to see all the little movements and gambols that the 7 or 8 little things were making as they rolled about in the basket, springing, crawling, and tumbling over each other. "Would you like to have one of them?" asked the keeper, who was regarding the child with pleasure as she jumped about for joy. "For myself? For always?" said she excitedly, and could not believe in such happiness. "To be true, you may have more, you may have them all, if you have room for them," said the man, who was glad to get rid of his kittens without being obliged to kill them. Heidi's delight was at a climax. In that big house, the kittens could have so much room, and how surprised and pleased Clara would be when she saw the dear little things. "But how can I take them home with me?" Heidi now asked, and put out her hand to take one immediately. But the big cat sprang on her arm, spitting at her so angrily that she drew back afraid. "I will bring them to you if you will tell me where." The keeper said this while he stroked the cat to quiet her. She was his good friend, and they had inhabited the tower for many years. "To Mr. Seisman's big house," answered Heidi. "There is a golden dog's head on the door, holding a thick ring in his mouth." It was not necessary to give all these directions to the tower master, who had lived all his life in the tower and knew every house far and near, and was also an old friend of Sebastian. "I know the house well, but to whom shall I bring the little things? For whom shall I ask? You do not belong to Mr. Seisman. No, but Clara. She will be delighted when the little kittens come home." The child could scarcely tear herself away from the enchanting basket, though the keeper said it was time to go down. "If I could only take 1 or 2 of them with me, one for myself and one for Clara. Oh, may I? Wait a moment," said the keeper, and drew the old cat cautiously into his little room. He set her down to a dish of milk, shut the door upon her, and came back saying, "Now take 2. Her eyes dancing with joy, Heidi chose a white one and a yellow one striped with white, and stuck one into her right hand and the other into her left pocket. They then went down. The lad still sat on the steps where they had left him, and when the keeper had closed the door and gone away, Heidi asked, "Which way must we take to go to Mr. Seisman's house?" "Don't know." She described the house, the door, the steps, and the windows, but her companion only shook his head. He knew nothing about all these. "Now look," she said with a new idea. "From one of the windows can be seen a big gray house, and the roof goes so." And she drew great notches in the air with her finger. Up jumped the boy at this. These were the signs that he needed. Now he knew the way. Off he started, and the little girl after him, and soon they stood before the door with the big metal dog's head. Heidi pulled the bell. Sebastian quickly appeared, and seeing the child, cried, "Come at once, as fast as you can." In sprang Heidi. The door slammed to. The servant had not even noticed the boy, who stood abashed outside. Quick, Mamselle, urged Sebastian again. Run into the dining room. They are already at the table, and Miss Rottenmeier looks like a loaded cannon. What possessed the little Mamselle to run away? Heidi entered the room. Miss Rottenmeier did not look up. Clara also took no notice. The silence was rather oppressive. Sebastian placed Heidi's chair for her. As the child took her place, the housekeeper began with a severe expression and a very solemn voice. Adelheid, I wish to speak to you later. I will only say now that you have misbehaved yourself greatly and deserve punishment for having left the house without asking permission or letting anybody know, and for running about until this late hour. It is most unheard of conduct. You came for a reply. At this, the lady's anger rose to a terrible pitch. How is this, Adelheid? She cried, speaking louder and louder. Do you dare, in addition to your misbehavior, to make game of me? Beware what you are about. I warn you. I am not, began Heidi. Mew, mew. Sebastian now almost flung his dish on the table and fled from the room. It is too much. This is what Mrs. Rottenmeier tried to say, but her voice was quite gone from excitement. Rise and leave the room, she stammered. Very much frightened, the child rose, trying once more to explain. I truly am not. Mew, mew, mew. But Heidi interposed Clara. When you see that it makes Miss Rottenmeier so angry, why do you keep on making that noise? I am not making it. It's the kittens. Heidi at last found chance to answer. How? What? Young cats? Screamed the lady. Sebastian! Tinette! Find the horrid things! Get rid of them! With the words, she ran into the study and bolted the door to make herself more secure. For of all created things, young cats were the most terrible to her. Sebastian stood outside, where he was fain to have his laugh out before he again entered. He had seen, while he was serving Heidi, a small feline head and then another peeping out of her pockets on either side, and foresaw the trouble that was brewing. When the storm fairy broke, he could contain himself not another moment, hardly long enough even to set his dish on the table. At last he went again into the room, but not until the terrified lady's cries for help had been repeated over and over again. Everything now seemed quiet and tranquil enough. Clara held the kittens in her lap. Heidi knelt on the floor by her side, and the children were playing most happily with the tiny, graceful creatures. Sebastian, said Clara to him as he entered, you must help us. You must find a nest for the kittens where Miss Rottenmeier will not see them, for she is afraid of them and will send them away. But we do want to keep the little darlings and have them here to play with whenever we are alone. Where can you hide them? I will take care of them, Miss Clara, said Sebastian willingly. I will make a nice little bed for them in a basket and put it somewhere so that the lady who is afraid of them shall not find it. Leave it all to me. Sebastian went at once to work and sniggered to himself as he thought, there will be some fun out of this, for he was not sorry to see the housekeeper stirred up now and then. The particular scolding that Miss Rottenmeier intended to administer to Heidi passed over till the following day, for she felt herself too much exhausted after all the emotion of anxiety, anger, and fear that the child had so unintentionally caused her to do anything that evening. She withdrew early, and the little girls followed in perfect contentment, knowing that the kittens were safe. Tomorrow, chapter 8. In the Seisman house, things do not go smoothly. Okay, this is Dr. Annette Feravich. Thank you so much for joining me here in the reading room, where we are reading the classic Heidi by Johanna Spyri. Thanks for joining me.